Good morning again, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Tyler Benz, one of the technical service reps here at Microscopist. I'm joined here with Saylor and Natalie, two of our tech reps here at our lab. Today we will be going over breaking down grease to prevent foaming issues. So a little bit about our lab. We're based out of the University of Wisconsin Research Park here in Madison, Wisconsin. And there will be some materials provided throughout this presentation. As you can see, several products. In addition, our information about our lab, those will be available in the handout section to the right. And as always, feel free to submit any questions to the chat. Feel free to have a conversation. And as we get through the presentation, we will start answering questions and move on from there. So Natalie's going to start talking a little bit about the issues of fats, oils, and greases, and we'll get into what issues that presents, as well as how to treat that.
Fogs, they're an issue for everybody. There are two filaments that can cause foaming from fog. The first one is nocardia-like organisms. And these guys, they're able to be identified through their true branching. They're the only filament that has true branching in wastewater. They don't have any clear cells. They're gram-positive, and they can stain, they can have Neisser-positive granules, but again, the main identifier for this guy is going to be its true branching. The other foam-causing filament is Microthrix parvicella, and these guys, same thing. They don't have any clear cells under light microscopy, but they will stain very gram-positive, which is going to be purple. So they're going to look like a tangled purple spaghetti kind of mess. And their key identifier is they have Neisser-positive granules. However, these filaments, they can be present in anaerobic conditions. They don't grow in them. They can survive in them for about a month, but they don't grow there. And they will lose those Neisser-positive granules, though. So how do these filaments cause problems? Why do I have them? So obviously, this is a grease webinar, so they like grease. But additionally, Microthrix, it likes colder temperatures, and nocardia, it is also found in a higher sludge age. These guys, they can cause foaming by, when they're abundant enough, they'll form a tangled mat-like structure and then attach to the air bubbles that are produced through aeration. Now, normally, these air bubbles are able just to float up and pop and all is good. However, filaments, they'll attach to them, float up with them, and create almost like kind of a dam, preventing them, the air bubbles from popping. And this is what causes your strong, stable foam. Additionally, these filaments can cause bulking and high TSS by growing within floc. When the filaments are within the floc, it's preventing them from compacting really nicely. And if floc can't compact, they can't settle, and that's what causes your bulking and high TSS.
Yeah, so Natalie's gone over nocardia-like organisms, NALO, and Microthrix parvicella a bit. I want to kind of dive a little bit into why these organisms tend to not only prefer fats, oils, and greases, but outcompete your floc-forming bacteria for those resources, especially when you're a system that has a significant portion of your BOD coming in fats, oils, and grease form. Now, both Microthrix parvicella and NALO, what they have in common is a really fatty cell wall. And now we know that filaments are a chain of single-cell organisms, so they always are exposing that fatty cell wall to the maximum amount of surface area. And fats, oils, and greases are hydrophobic, meaning they dislike water. So they'll tend to have, just physically, just pure physics, tend to aggregate together in a system. And so by having a fatty cell wall layer, your filaments, Microthrix parvicella and NALO, will naturally bind up all the fats, oils, and grease in the system. Once those fats, oils, and greases are bound up and in a set position and not flying all over in the system, they become much easier to break down and utilize by your filaments, as opposed to what you would like to happen, and that being your floc capturing least fog compounds and breaking them down within floc. So when we talk about fats, oils, and greases, a little bit of the chemistry, we're generally talking about triglycerides. So a glycerol compound with 3 fatty acid chains, your triglyceride. Now, in the system, they need to undergo hydrolysis, which is a reaction that's going to happen out with the aid of an enzyme often. And this is the main functioning ability of our Quiczyme-Al product, is we are cleaving that glycerol and those fatty acids apart. Glycerol is utilized in a different pathway. Our main source of energy from triglycerides are the fatty acids that come from this hydrolysis. And one thing to keep in mind when we talk about utilizing triglycerides in your system is what sort of nutrient balance are they bringing to the table? Now, everybody's aware of the carbon to nitrogen phosphorus ratios. These are important ratios within a system in order to maintain health, really. You need a balance of all these elements in order for your flock-forming bacteria to form appropriate structures and proteins and reproduce, and EPS. All these things it's very crucial to have your carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus ratio. What do we notice about glycerol and fatty acids? And that is there's no nitrogen and phosphorus in either of these compounds. There's a ton of carbon in both of these compounds. So when you're a system that has a significant amount of fats, oils, and greases entering, and that's your primary BOD source, you are more than likely lacking in nitrogen and phosphorus. And this is the shortcoming that we also try to stop up using our foam buster and other nutritional products, is that we want to promote your flock-forming bacteria to take up those fatty acids, but those fatty acids are nothing but carbon. So we want to bring nitrogen and phosphorus to the table so that your flock-forming bacteria are more likely to take up those fatty acids and kind of give them the tools that they need to outcompete the filamentous bacteria that are already in the system that kind of have a leg up. And then one more little chemistry thing. The beta oxidation is a reaction that's typically happening within the cells, within your filamentous bacteria and your flock-forming bacteria. Once those fatty acids are uptick, they are beta oxidized, meaning they're cleaved and utilized for energy. They produce acetyl-CoA, which is going to go on and do a number of different things in the cell. But this is essentially the process that we want to promote. We want to make your flock-forming bacteria take up fatty acids and perform beta oxidation.
All right. Yeah. So now that Saylor and Natalie have given a little bit of insight and background as to how these filaments, number one, get in and thrive in your system, as well as the challenges that are presented as becoming overabundant in these sorts of filaments. So here at Aquafix, we strive for proactivity over reactivity. If you can stop it at the source before it becomes a problem, you obviously aren't going to have a problem down the road. So one of the products we utilize as such is Greasilla. By working upstream and focusing on elimination of fats and greases before they even enter the plant, you're already going to be ways ahead of the game. So with Greasilla, we can apply both bacteria and enzymes to either lift stations, collection systems, collection lines, grease traps, you name it. By doing so, you start the degradation process a lot sooner. As Saylor talked about, it's really critical to break those long-chain fatty acids that are only consumed by filaments and filaments alone. By breaking those up into more tolerable, more metabolizing compounds such as volatile fatty acids and ultimately your glycerols and everything like that, your native bacteria are going to be able to eat that. So that's exactly what Greasilla does. I say it's always more of an aggressive treatment for hardened on grease caps or even just lift stations that get a high abundance of fats and greases. Furthermore, a more long-term kind of slower releasing treatment is our bug in a rope. It's a very simple and cheap product to use. It also has the bacteria and enzyme compounds that Greasilla also has, except this is, like I said, a little more slow releasing. So you get more of a long-term, more so a mitigation treatment over time. Once again, applying it to a lift station so that you can start the process a lot sooner. This is just an example simply of, over a very fats, oils, and grease-based lift station, and what we were able to do in utilizing Greasella and bug on a rope. As you can see, that's only a 10-day treatment. Further continuation of such will continue to degrade, more and more of that substrate that's been built up in those lift stations, as well as mitigate any incoming. As we kind of work towards more reactive measures, or honestly, even still very proactive measures, but working towards the plant itself. So in any aerated treatment plant, as those fats, oils, and greases are coming in, if you weren't able to start the process upstream, you can now begin the process at the plant itself. So by applying QuickSime, we're still able to degrade those long-chain fatty acids into volatile fatty acids so that your bacteria can readily uptake such. QuickSime, as opposed to Greasella, is going to be entirely enzyme based. So what we want to do there is utilize the existing bacteria in the system and apply just pure enzyme to it so that it can facilitate that degradation process. And as you can see there, it's going to improve BOD removal in certain plants where you are getting super high amounts of fats, oils, and greases, like any dairies, any restaurants, you name it. And then, as Saylor kind of touched on towards the end of his speech there, is that now when the fats, oils, and greases are in the volatile fatty acid stage, they still do need a little bit of a push to get over that hump and fully complete the degradation process. So we have this very high carbon substrate coming in the form of volatile fatty acids. So we need to apply additional nitrogen and phosphorus to better balance out that ratio. And in doing so, we can further complete that process of consuming the volatile fatty acids and ultimately provide cleaner effluent, all while removing and starving out any of the existing filaments in the treatment system. And furthermore, there can be mechanical measures put in place when you do have, a high abundance of foam. So you already have these filaments. So you can either mechanically remove the foam. You can obviously waste heavier. That's something we recommend with pretty much any and all filaments. Get it out of the system as fast as possible. Furthermore, you can always chlorinate the RAS line. We always say to err on the side of caution a little bit, because you can negatively impact not only obviously the filaments, but any existing bacteria in the system. So we recommend about 2 to 5 ppms per day in your RAS line if you can do so safely. That all those mechanical measures in place will be able to go after the filaments directly. And then QuickSime and Foam Buster will help you mitigate any further growth of such, and then set yourself up for better success in the long term. And this is an example of what we did here at a chicken processing plant. As you can see on the left, that is a high amount of, it was Nicardia at that time. So in doing so, they took the steps to put all those mechanical measures in place, and then we simply implemented QuickSime and Foam Buster simultaneously, and that's how you get the end result there. Furthermore, this is something I recommend anytime you have not only any settling, bulking issues, but especially if you are having a foaming event and it's very persistent, you want to get that identified, because as we alluded to, there's 2 different types and they are treated at very similar, but still a little bit different of processes, that being the Nicardia and your microthrix. So number 1, this will give you a good idea of exactly what foaming filament you're dealing with, as well as provide specific recommendations when you are using QuickSime and Foam Buster. And then furthermore, be able to give you a baseline. So when you go out and start treating these filaments, you'll be able to refer back and get a good progress report on where that is. So that's something done here by both Saylor and Natalie. Very quick and painless process, only takes about 2 to 3 business days to get a report back from us. And like I said, we'll provide all those recommendations and get you a good baseline to get started. So with that, we'll start addressing any of the questions. And as we kind of work through this, if your question goes unanswered, or if there's anything that you may think of after this presentation, you're more than welcome to reach out to either myself, who, as you can see, covers the west and northeast region of the United States, or Chris, who covers much of the southeast. And for those of you in international territories, Landon Wyatt will be your technical service rep as well. So with that, we will get started on questions. So first question right here: can I still have a problem with fats, oils, and greases even if I don't have foam? You certainly can. And as for most of you, I'm sure you've dealt with either a lift station cleanout or something like that. So even if you don't have any foaming filaments or anything, by treating with Greasilla or bug on a rope upstream, it'll at least get you not only preventative dosing against any potential future outbreak, but also decrease the amount of times you really have to clean out your lift station. And furthermore, even just having grease in your system alone will contribute to bulking, even if you don't have filaments or anything. So it's always something, as I said, it's better to be proactive than reactive. All right. Another question here, very similar question. We clean our lift stations regularly. Can I still have a fog issue? Certainly. Much like I said in the last question here, it can certainly lead to other things, not just foaming and bulking. But it's always, once again, better to set yourself up for success and start treating as soon as you can, whether that's upstream or just applying enzyme simply to your aeration basin here. So let's see, next question. I have been told that fog chemicals used in the collection system just push the fog further downstream. Is that true? And isn't it better to allow the grease traps and interceptors capture the fats, oils, and greases? This is a good question for one of you if you want to take it away. Saylor?
Yeah, so in a lot of ways, when you do clean out captured or built up greases and fats upstream, you are pushing that down into the system. But in a lot of ways, there's two things that you mitigate that with. Is we talked about that hydrolysis action that's going to be happening upstream as opposed to in your basin. Those fogs will enter your basin in a form that's much more manageable by your flock forming bacteria as opposed to just a big glob of grease kind of running in. And two, you got to clean it eventually, right? I mean, you can't just let it build up in perpetuity. It'll just clog lines, or you'll end up with stuff just washing in uncontrolled. So the best way to do it would be to just not let it build up to that point. Keep it under control upstream, and then you won't have to worry about it washing in. But one thing to remember is that we have seen instances where people who have a significant amount of grease built up come in, use a product, and it washes in, and they do see short-term slug loads going in because you just have so much BOD that's built up. And while hydrolysis and our products are changing the form of that fog, we're not necessarily altering the BOD. It's still BOD, it's still energy. We're just making it more accessible.
Yeah, so to really summarize that is applying a bacteria enzyme gets that degradation process started a whole lot sooner. Definitely don't use any emulsifiers where, like Saylor said, you're going to get that short-term benefit, but all you're doing is really just pushing those fats, oils, and greases downstream so that you'll inevitably end up with, those grease bergs coming through, or simply just quite a bit of food for these filaments to survive and to become quite abundant. So make sure there's any product used upstream has at least some bacterial and some enzymatic capabilities to it. Will fats, oils, and greases affect my DO levels? Certainly, like any food, high concentrated food substrate coming through your system will essentially suffocate any bacteria in the system just because it's so high in nutrients and so much food coming through that, much of you that deal with either dairy upstream or any sort of creamery, meat processor, any industry really. You will see, say a slug load comes through, you will see DO levels drop significantly. Fats, oils, and greases are exactly the same way. All the more reason to start the degradation process as soon as you can. And even furthermore, even ramping up if you know that these slug loads are coming through. Even ramping up DO is a good way to overcome that as well. But certainly you want to go after the substrate to be more proactive once again than reactive.
Just to kind of jump in on that one, I think more so we're talking about fog foaming. And when you have certain thick filamentous foaming, such as Ambromicella or Nalo, you can block off access to the air. I mean, a big part of oxygenating your basin, your DO, is that oxygen exchange from just air into the basin via mixing. You block that off with a layer of foam, especially very thick foam, which Nalo foaming tends to be, and you can run into DO issues just because you have less access to oxygen.
Looks like there should be oh yeah, there we go. So what microscopic changes will I see when doing a fog filament treatment? What are signs of success? So Natalie, this is a perfect question as our microscopist.
Yeah, so when doing a fog filament treatment, signs of success will be obviously your foaming is dissipating, gone, but microscopically, you'll see a decline in filaments. Your flock, they'll start to look a little bit better if they're interfering. So yeah, it's just mainly you'll see a decrease in those filaments. You'll see improvements on site.
All right. We've seen success with LNP for seasonal nocardiiform prevention. Also for industrial plants, long-chain fatty acids can stabilize surfactant foam, and we've seen some success preventing/correcting that with enzyme product as well. Oh, well, not a question, but we appreciate it. Yeah, what James there is referring to is Quicksand Mel, as you saw earlier in the slides, as well as Quicksand P. Quicksand P is usually reserved for proteins, but once again, when dealing with any sort of overloading from industries, it's a great way to reduce much of the heavy BOD impacts coming through. While once again, much like the last question, avoiding any of those loss in DO and really just overall looking to degrade everything coming through.
We kind of talked about those nutrient balances as well earlier, with fog being entirely carbon. Quicksand P is going to break up those amino acids, make complex proteins easily degradable, present that nitrogen, and especially for certain industries, dairy, there's going to be a lot of fog and a lot of complex proteins, and that together can create some pretty major problems. So it's awesome to see success in the field.
Let's see. So we've been using Aquafix products the last 2 years. It helps a lot, but doesn't completely take away the foam. Perhaps it is user inexperience. If we send samples to you, will recommendations be discussed along with the results? Yes. Absolutely, yes. Anytime we get samples in, no matter the situation at hand, we're always going to provide recommendations to get you to a point that is much better than when you initially sent in samples. As for the issues with it doesn't completely take away the foam, once again, there's mechanical measures in place too, which is absolutely critical when doing a Quicksand Mountain foam buster treatment, for example, because what filaments you have in the system are already obviously in your system. Quicksand Mountain foam buster is really looking ahead of the fact and trying to cut off that food source and ultimately starve out those filaments. But you're still not going to get rid of those filaments unless you're able to mechanically remove them from your system by increased wasting or mechanical removal via back truck or another mechanical measure to do that, as well as chlorination in the RAS line, because chlorine is just about the only thing that will directly kill those filaments. But once again, you got to err on the side of caution because you don't want to over-chlorinate. So it's not just Quicksand Mountain foam buster. There's also other facets as well. But as always, Quicksand Mountain foam buster is a way to be proactive and stop it at the source. When addressing hardened grease in a lift station, what is the best plan of action and what products should I use? Yep, 100% Greasezilla. As I said earlier in the Greasezilla slide, it works best, especially on those hardened accumulations, whether that's a full-on grease map or simply just build up along the walls, just by simply applying Greasezilla, either spraying it, metering it upstream, or slugging it in. Either way, as long as you can get the most contact with the Greasezilla, it will go to work. And really the timeline always depends on, of course, how much fats and greases you have already built up. So it's really just a matter of time until Greasezilla begins to eat it completely. And furthermore, once you have that all degraded and the lift station is looking relatively clean, then you can simply just add in a bug on a rope to finish the job and get you that long-term success. How do I reduce a grease cap in a lagoon? Great question. So it's really going to come down to how abundant how abundant the grease cap is in that said lagoon. So in addition to Quicksand Mountain foam buster, which is what we'd recommend to insert into the lagoon, we also have another product called Vitasym Grease, which is, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's just a water-soluble bacterial packet designed for that grease degradation. So think of it more so as kind of a dry greasezilla, so to speak. So what we would do is inject the Quicksime ML directly into the lagoon, let that mix, and then simply add in Vitasin grease packets into the center and disperse evenly throughout. Once again, much like the greasezilla working in a lift station, it's always going to depend on how much grease is in the lagoon, and that's going to dictate kind of the timeline of everything. But we've had plenty of success eliminating grease caps in many different lagoons. More effective approach is to use dissolved air flotation or DAF. Is it correct? Absolutely. Yeah, it's always good to see, especially in an industrial setting where there are high amounts of fats, oils, and greases incoming. It's always, if you can get that out of the system before it even enters the system, that's a fantastic way of doing so. So if you have the ability to use a DAF, you're way ahead of the game. And then furthermore, you can still add in Quicksime ML after the fact. So just downstream from that DAF is a perfect injection point for any of our grease control products to really clean up any of the residual fats and greases that don't get separated out exactly. When treating fats, oils, and grease filaments with your products, what mechanical changes should be made? Yeah, so once again, as I alluded to, is biggest thing is waste. That's something most plants will always be able to do. Waste about 20 to 30% heavier. Bring that sludge H down and get most of those filaments away. And once again, furthermore, you can always do mechanical foam removal and certain chlorination. And that's something, if you're hesitant on doing so or have any questions regarding that, once again, you're more than welcome to reach out for us.
And tacking onto that, when Tyler says mechanical removal, you want to mechanically remove that foam and dispose of it off-site. You don't want to cycle it back through your plant because you'll still have issues. And also with the chlorination, while that is helpful for some filaments, there are other filaments that struggle, and that's not necessarily the best approach. For example, nocardia-like organisms. If you chlorinate those guys, it'll take away your foam temporarily, but what actually it's doing is it's going to fragment those filaments, and they're back in their kind of baby stage where they don't cause problems. But then when they're in your system long enough, they'll go back to their adult stage and cause foaming again. So it's better to treat the fog issues that are causing their growth and completely removing them off-site, because the dose to truly kill Nalo with chlorine is too high that it'll kill everything in your system. So that's just something to also keep in mind.
And that's all the more reason to simply just do a lab test, get it identified so you know exactly what we're dealing with, so that, like Natalie said, that you can, dictate your treatment around what we identify in your flock. Because, yeah, there could be, maybe it's one that's absolutely predominant, go after that and treat that. But oftentimes there's going to be multiple filaments you're dealing with. And so we just want to be extra careful and be for certain what we need to do to get that remediated. Will addressing fats, oils, and grease issues in my collection system reduce H2S issues? Saylor?
Well, there are really two different things that are going on. You have H2S production because of breakdown of substrate by those organisms that produce H2S. So I guess theoretically, if you addressed fog, you could reduce H2S, but really, your fog's not causing H2S. It's just anything. You would have too much sugar in there, and you'd have H2S issues. If you have H2S issues, you've got something else going on.
It does bring up a good point, though, in that you're not going to want to apply, a bacterial product to an area that has severely, severely low DO. Oftentimes with H2S, that is quite often the issue, is that you don't have oxygen. So if you were to want to address this issue, it would be first looking at introducing additional oxygen in the system to make that area, rather than being mostly anaerobic or anoxic, bring it to an aerobic state, and then you can start degrading fats, oils, or greases with just a simple either bacteria or enzyme product. How do fats, oils, and greases lead to MLSS settling issues? Yeah.
So the first thing that comes to mind is the fogs. They're going to promote the growth of filaments, like I had discussed earlier, specifically nocardia-like organisms and microthrips. But additionally, there is a filament called type 0092 that likes fog. However, it only causes bulking, doesn't cause foaming. But basically, these filaments, they will start to grow within flock, and whether it be already established flock, it'll push the filaments, will push them apart, break the flock apart, or it'll just prevent good compaction in general. And then since these flock, they're small, broken apart, don't have enough mass to settle properly, that's what's going to create your settling issues.
Like we'll go back to a little bit more on emulsification here. So regarding that, does the product work better on fats, oils, and greases in solution or particulate fats, oils, and greases?
I think largely anything is going to work better on fog and solution when you're talking about products, but they will work on particulate fog as well. But this is just like physically thinking about it. You have a big glob of grease, you're limited in surface area, as opposed to a bunch of fog that's in solution you're going to have ready access. So that product is going to go further in an area where you have soluble fog, but doesn't mean you can't use it in areas where you have built up grease and fog.
And furthermore, I think you already touched on this, but are you familiar with any emulsifiers that also degrade the fats, oils, and greases? Feel free to step in, but really with any emulsifiers, all you're doing is effectively just heating up the fats, oils, and greases so that it becomes solubilized. It's not necessarily changing the chemical characteristics, just the physical. So in doing so, yes, you're going to get that removal upstream. The grease will get moved down. But unfortunately, once it gets cool enough, it's just going to re-solidify. So you're going to end up with even more grease buildup downstream. And even in some certain circumstances, you'll start to get heavy slug loads of grease coming in, which will absolutely increase how many filaments you'll be able to grow in your system. So really, any and all emulsifiers we try to stay away from because you're really not addressing the root cause. You're literally pushing the problem just downstream. So we just avoid any and all emulsifiers, to be frank. Are there any additional benefits to fog removal beyond improved efficiency? Well, efficiency really is the main goal here. Any additional benefits? So obviously, as we talked about, you're going to be less likely to have any sort of microthrips or nocardia-like organism or foaming events. But you're also going to get improved settling because you're not going to have the filaments, bulking up the system. Your filament or your flock formers are going to be able to adhere together a lot better. So they're going to ultimately, settle a lot better. And once they're, formed the best flock possible, you're going to be removing as much nutrients as your system really permits. So yeah, to be honest, I don't know how to further improve on that question, but efficiency is really the end game. Is what we want to do here.
Yeah, I think maybe part of it might be thinking about, well, I know I have fog coming in, but I'm also hitting my limits. So, I don't really need more efficiency. I'm already as efficient as I need to be. And to that extent, it's good to think about when you have systems like that fog is still being a stressor in the system. To some extent, it's changing the way that your system needs to behave in order to break those down. And we often see when like a system crashes or you have major problems that come up, it's not necessarily one thing. It tends to be the accrual of issues over time. And then because it's an accrual of issues over time, it's more difficult to get back to a functional state than it would be to just address these things as they occur. Or, if you have a fog issue, even though your effluent might be fine, you should probably still be looking at doing some proactive things to kind of see how we can improve that fog issue.
Yeah, because exactly just like what Saylor said is, maybe the issue isn't an issue at all right now. You're treating fine. Effluent numbers are great. But, like you said, they all couple. So if, say, it even just gets colder, that could be simply what kicks it off and starts to become an issue. So, yeah, always better to be proactive about it. Can I use Foam Buster alone to reduce my foam? So this is when it gets into really case-by-case issues. So it's very unlikely that you're going to need Foam Buster and Foam Buster alone. Typically, we see if you can get to that volatile fatty acid stage, where much of your fats and greases are in that form, then Foam Buster alone would certainly be a viable option. But that's where the issue is. You need to get it into that volatile fatty acid form first. Rarely is it going to happen, in high abundance naturally. So you do need that enzyme factor in that. So always is a case by case kind of basis. But rarely are you going to use Foam Buster alone.
Now, Foam Buster alone fixed your issue. That would tell me that your flock forming bacteria have the capacity to outcompete your filamentous bacteria or to deal with the fog that's coming in. They're just missing something. And so Foam Buster is acting as a nutritional supplement to get them what they're missing. And in that case, we have better nutritional supplements for that purpose than Foam Buster.
What are your thoughts on installing a Hiblo air pump to agitate grease at a lift station to break it down? Not sure exactly what a Hiblo air pump is, but I imagine it's just a simple way to add oxygen into the system, which I'm always for it. If you can add in oxygen anywhere you see fit, you're always going to, no matter what, be able to avoid, as I kind of touched on earlier, any hydrogen sulfide buildup. You're going to get much better efficiency out of any bacteria should you apply bacteria to that exact spot. I would say just air alone, you may kind of be treading into the emulsifier area where you're simply just breaking it off the sides and sending it downstream. So I'd be a little hesitant. But once again, if you were to apply a bacteria or enzyme, you'll get much more efficiency in terms of degradation.
Yeah, the simple answer is if your downstream system can handle the extra grease that you're shooting in their direction, then I think it's totally fine. It feels like, if I had to guess, it feels like you're just using some action to physically break down the built up grease. And seems like a really low investment, simple solution. If it doesn't cause problems downstream, seems like let's go at it. I think we missed one.
Oh, yep. So use Vitasim grease or Greasil in my wet well. Both are certainly going to be viable options. I mean, we've seen success with both products independently for quite a number of years, pretty much since they were always developed. Typically, I would recommend Greasilla over Vitasim grease. It's a little more flexible in that you can not only spray it so it adheres directly to any hardened grease around the walls of lift stations or collection lines, but you also can have the ability then to meter it upstream or simply just slug load it. So there's quite a number of different options in terms of using Greasilla. Whereas Vitasim grease is going to be, I would almost argue, it's more similar to bug on a rope, where it's going to be slow releasing bacteria, so you get that long-term mitigation effect as opposed to direct fats, oils, and greases reduction for large accumulations. So certainly not opposed to using one or the other, or certainly both. You're more than welcome to use both as well. Physically, you're removing foam. Can this be done by skimming the foam off the top of the wastewater? Is this effective? So basically the biggest thing we want to see, and what Natalie had said earlier, is really just making sure whichever method you're using to mechanically remove the foam, whether it's skimming it, vacuuming it off, as long as you're not introducing it back into the system, totally fine by us. Really biggest thing is just take the foam out of your plant, get rid of it. And same can be said too. I wanted to bring this up with looking at if you have had to reseed your activated sludge plant. always be sure to do a microanalysis on that seed sludge before you add it into your system, because we've seen quite a number of different instances where, you know, a municipality has gotten seed sludge either from an industry or another municipality down the road, and it's been chock full of Nocardia. And certainly that's another way to introduce the filament in there. So just be cautious with that. How will fats, oils, and greases affect BioP treatment? So actually we just talked about this the other day.
Yeah, essentially your BioP system, you're going to need BOD. Easily accessible soluble BOD is better. Fog isn't necessarily easily accessible soluble BOD. Will fog necessarily harm your BioP treatment? Not at a reasonable amount, but if you have a ton of fog coming in, you're going to see it. You're going to see diminished BioP removal. If you are using an enzyme product or something else to break down that fog, perform that hydrolysis, you know, produce those fatty acids ahead of your BioP system, you'll see improved BioP removal typically, because those fatty acids are very accessible and soluble BOD. If that answers the question. Essentially, it's like if you feel like you have a ton of fog, you feel like your BioP isn't doing what it should be, likely fog is affecting it. If you have a BioP and you don't have a lot of fog and you feel like your BioP is doing great, you're doing great.
Typically, it helps having just a lot of food, good bioavailable food for BioP treatment. Obviously, not fats, oils, or greases, but even volatile fatty acids are an excellent source. So that may be something where you don't necessarily need foam mustard to encourage that uptake, because BioP will take whatever is readily available and utilize that. Will treating fog issues with quicktime melt or other products reduce or raise BOD? I believe you touched on this earlier.
Yeah, neither. So we're using products to cleave certain chains, but ultimately your BOD exists as a degradation of that substrate all the way down to nothing. So by breaking that triglyceride down into fatty acids or even further, you're not necessarily changing your total BOD, you're just changing the form. So you're making it more accessible. So you're not increasing BOD. That being said, if you're using products upstream to break up grease cap, even using enzyme products in this way, you will be increasing BOD, because this is BOD that normally wasn't being introduced to the system that is now being introduced to the system.
Yeah, so this is a good time, and definitely keep those questions coming. But this is a good time. We should have a couple polls if so right here on your screen, if you want to head to the poll section, we got a quick question for the attendees here. Is when do you experience foaming? Is it, you know, spring, summer, fall, winter, never at all, or is it a constant struggle? It's looking kind of as we expected. Fall, winter, kind of going back to the beginning of this presentation. Plants in the cold weather are definitely going to be more susceptible, especially to microfix. Operators often tend to carry a higher sludge age going into the winter, and certainly, as we kind of talked about, certain factors, or most factors, can compound on one another. So going back to that question of, you know, we don't necessarily have a fats, oils, and grease issue. It seems to be, you know, well maintained, but maybe fall and winter, when that cold weather hits, that may be just enough to get that microfix over the hump, so to speak, to where it does become an issue. And year round is certainly another. It makes sense that that's also a majority answer. Is both these filaments that we talked to are extremely, extremely stingy, as you can see, in terms of how you're able to treat it. It's not as easy as something like, you know, O2-1N, where, oh, you just need to add nitrogen. You really need to start, once again, working upstream and degrading those fats and greases. It's just a long process in general to degrade those. So once again, it then becomes a longer problem in terms of the road to recovery, so to speak. So very similar.
Oh, I was just gonna say, the four of you that don't have foaming, you have major bragging rights.
Yeah, consider yourselves lucky, because yeah, as most operators, especially in northern climates, can attest to. It's quite an issue, and can be quite the headache. So yeah, we have pretreatment only. How can I reduce fats and greases? Yeah, so going back to Greasezilla and bug and rope specifically, with pretreatment, you obviously don't have that buildup of good organic sludge where most of your flock formers and certainly in the suspended liquid above are going to be held. So you do need to have that bacterial aspect in addition to the enzyme. So that's where we'd simply recommend, Greasezilla, bug on a rope, or Biodistim grease, or a combination of both. Once again, just depending on how much fats or greases are coming through and how big of an issue it's causing. How do you combat fats or greases? Yeah, so every operator, no matter where you are in the country, no matter what facility you operate, you're going to have some element of fats or greases. So how do you go about treating that? Do you just let it be and your system runs totally fine? Do you do often, lift station cleanouts, making sure that you're getting the fats or greases out before it hits the plant? Do you use an emulsifier? Or do you use bacteria/enzymes?
Or alternatively, do you just go on vacation and say, it's going to fix itself?
Yeah, let the weekend crew take care of it. And yeah, once again, very much as we kind of anticipated. And same with the people that don't experience any foaming. The 3 of you that experience nothing or that don't have to do anything, that's awesome. Totally fine, totally reasonable as long as it's not causing an issue. Once again, though, something to kind of be cautious about and keep an eye on because, it can flip like that. But those of you doing lift station collection cleanouts, that's obviously another good way, much like, you're mechanically removing foam. If you can mechanically remove the fats or greases, don't have to deal with it. Yeah, and then as always, bacteria and enzymes. Right on.
And as the poll is being talked about and stuff, feel free to keep filtering in those questions.
Yeah, we only got about 10 minutes left, so get your questions in. But of course, like I've said, feel free to, if anything comes up after this or you're interested in, learning more about what we can do, how we can help. Myself, Chris, Landon, we're always happy to chat, happy to answer any and all questions. Can you touch again on the importance of doing microanalysis when addressing foaming filaments? Yeah. So first and foremost, we're going to be able to identify exactly what is the cause. Obviously, it's fats or greases, but what filament are we dealing with in particular? Are we dealing with multiple filaments? We'll be able to identify all of those and essentially prioritize and quantify, which ones are in highest abundance and highest priority, or which ones are either just simply side effects or ones that you don't necessarily need to be too cautious about. And then furthermore, we'll be able to get you an exact estimate of where your sludge age is currently. So for those of you that, carry a higher sludge age going into the winter, we'll be able to kind of confirm that for you and tell you yes or no, that is where you need to be, that sort of thing. And then certainly it opens the door for a future comparison. So when you are treating this filament or treating really any issue when it comes to wastewater, we'll be able to use that initial test as a baseline and take that future test as more so of a compare contrast. So we can tell you, all right, how much progress have you made with this treatment? And certainly are there any adjustments needed to kind of really take you through the home stretch?
And just kind of jumping into when identifying the cause of foaming, it's best to do it through microscopy instead of just assuming that it's filamentous or surfactant based on the color, because the color, that is not a reliable way to tell. So definitely doing microanalysis to see that, yes, my foaming is due to filaments or it isn't. That is a key factor as well. And also microanalysis, it can be helpful because, as I kind of talked about with nocardia nalo has stages. And if you're able to get it while it's still young and treat it then, you can save yourself a lot of headache.
Yeah, and that's exactly that. The bugs don't lie. What we see is exactly how your system is at that current time and place. So for example, for some of you that, don't necessarily have a foaming issue, if you were to do a microscopy, sometimes you still will even see, like Natalie said, where you'll see the early stages of growth. So at that point, you can catch it before it even becomes a problem. So all the more reason how microscopy can help you. Same as said, for it's a little off topic, but DO is a big one. Oftentimes we'll get a lot of samples where, plants say they have high DO, in the 4 or 5 region, but under the microscope, we see signs of low DO. So somewhere along the lines, there's a low DO issue. So once again, just microscopy can help you identify and alleviate the issues before it even becomes a problem. And that's something, once again, if you're interested at all, I'd be more than happy to chat about it. Otherwise, kits are available online. We can always send some out as well. Really, whatever works best for everyone. And don't forget, we still have all those downloadable documents in the handout section, so feel free to download those if you haven't. Just a little more information on all the products we discussed today, including lab testing. Those are also available on our website, teamaquafix.com. You got it. Yep. So teamaquafix.com is where you'll find all the information you found today, as well as more information on our testing and services. And certainly my contact information and all your reps' contact information. And with that being said, suppose we'll wrap it up then. Feel free, once again, send any questions our way if you got some after the fact. Otherwise, thank you all very much for attending today's webinar. This concludes our 2023 series.